Welcome to Pop Culture Retro, which was recently voted the 15th best podcast by the residents of Golden Years Retirement Community in Boca Raton, Florida. Each show will revisit some of your favorite pop culture memories with insider and outsider perspectives. Now, please help me welcome your hosts, Moosie Drier and Jonathan Rsen.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of Pop Culture Retro. I'm Jonathan Rsen, along with Moosie Drier, and today we are thrilled to welcome someone who's been an actor appearing in several films. He's the host of the syndicated radio show Weekends with Ed Kalegi, where he's interviewed such people as Carol Burnett, Norman Lear, and Julie Andrews. And he's also the author of the book, It Was Great to Say Hello To. Please help us welcome Ed Kalegi. Ed, thanks so much for joining us.
Jonathan, Moosie, it is an absolute pleasure. I appreciate the invitation, and I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you, Ed.
Let's start by going back with you. So you grew up in Jersey. So was your family very into like the performing arts and everything?
Not necessarily, but I was very much into media. I was pretty much in love with my 5-inch Sony black and white television. We're talking about like the early 1970s here. And through that, very snowy black and white picture with horrible vertical hold, I saw a lot of things that intrigued me. And so I was a child of the 70s and an adolescent of the 80s. So that was a wonderful time for pop culture. And it just made a very deep impact upon me. The things I saw, the personalities, and then I got into the early days of talk radio, people such as Larry King and Tom Snyder, and it all made a real impression upon me. So I didn't come from a performing arts family, but the performing arts always interested me in a lot of different ways.
Well, that's what I want to hear. One of the things I read about you, which I loved, so when you were a kid, you set up a pretend radio station in your room. What was it to you about the format of performing as opposed to like something like acting?
It's funny because I would listen to the radio and I was intrigued by who is that on the other side of the speaker. Somebody was there talking to me and they're playing songs that I like and they're telling me about the weather and the news and all these other things. And I'm thinking at like 7 years old, I can do this. So when I was 6, my parents bought me a cassette tape recorder. When I was 7, they bought me a set of Radio Shack walkie-talkies. So I'm thinking, here we go. This is the makings of a broadcast facility. So I took one of the walkie-talkies and got rid of it. You only need one transmitter. So I got some of my dad's duct tape, and I taped the transmit button on the side of the walkie-talkie down so that the mic was always hot. And so then I went and I taped songs off the radio, and I'm doing my own top 40 format in my bedroom when I'm 7 years old, and I'm interviewing my friends, and I'm getting the weather, I'm writing newscasts. So, for whatever reason, I was just completely into it. So I had my own, I guess you could call it my own pirate radio station, but it was a walkie-talkie. So who could hear it? Only other kids that had the same Radio Shack walkie-talkie or some nut on some CB only like 38 feet from the house that could listen to some crazy 7-year-old and they're doing his own radio thing.
I love that. Radio Shack's a Tandy corporation. A lot of people don't know Radio Shack. We do. Children of the 70s. Man,
that's right. It. And then Moosie, when we grew up, and then you go into Radio Shack and you go in to buy a 9-volt battery and they wanted all your personal information. I could never figure that out. Name, social security number, phone number. I just want to buy a damn battery and get out of the store. I could never understand that.
I know. I do remember that. I just want to pay cash and get out of here. I don't need the background check. So I love the fact that you did your own little shows on your own, because it means when you were a child, you weren't pushed into anything. This is what you wanted to do.
Yep,
this was your passion.
Indeed.
What age were you when you realized that you did have a talent for this?
When I went into high school, I was, 14 years old. And I have to say, even though I had my own radio show in my room, I was still a shy kid. And I credit my drama director in high school. His name was Gordon Inverno Jr., and he was the most influential person in my early life because he brought me out of my shell. And once I started performing on stage, something clicked. There is something inherently wonderful about performing on stage live in front of an audience and hearing that reaction, because theater is different every single night. And being on stage and taking what I did in my room on my pretend radio station and then doing it in a much more outwardly way, it truly lit the fire for me to explore a lot of different things within the performing arts. So then I started acting, and I ended up working even some summer stock at the Bucks County Playhouse in New Hope, Pennsylvania, which to this day is a great little regional theater. So from one thing, it led to something else. And it was a love for performing that still exists within me to this day.
I'm curious though, I'm sure we all have the same ones, but who were some of your favorite talk show hosts as a kid?
Dick Cavett. Dick Cavett for
Really?
me is the best talk show host who ever existed because he has the wonderful trifecta. He has intelligence, he has curiosity, and he has wit. If you have all three of those things, you've got 90% of the game won already when you walk out on the field because he could sit and talk to anyone about anything. In terms of radio, I loved Larry King. This is before Larry King went all TV with the suspenders and CNN and all that.
Yeah.
When he would sit in a tiny little radio studio right outside Washington, D.C., and he would chain smoke his way through like a 5 hour overnight radio show, but he could talk to John Dean one night. He could talk to a guy that collected old pieces of Swiss cheese the next night, but he made it all interesting and it made for a fascinating listen. And another guy that a lot of people remember for TV, I remember more for radio, Tom Snyder. Tom Snyder was a typical TV performer, but I think one of the highlights of his career is when he worked for the ABC radio network late 80s into the early 90s and did an absolutely fantastic late night radio talk show.
Yeah, I love Tom Snyder. And you know what? I remember when I was a kid, I'll admit, because he would come on late night. I forgot after, maybe it was after Carson or something.
It was. Yep.
Yeah. And there was a time where I thought that maybe he wasn't cool or something. I was a kid. I didn't know better. And because he had this weird, slow cadence. I don't, but then I realized after time, he was getting very personable. He wasn't this fake plastic TV personality. He was actually interviewing and he was so good at it. And years later, before he passed, I used to see him take his dog, Oliver. I only know the dog's name because he used to yell for his dog all the time up near my house. And I had a couple conversations with him. And I have to say, I ended up being in awe with Tom Snyder. Like he was just legendary, Hall of Fame broadcaster. Good choice. Good taste.
Moosie, he did a great interview once with Charles Manson. And I mean, you talk about somebody who's going to be difficult to interview because you sit down in a situation like that, you don't know where the hell that thing's going to go. But he did an interview that was able to expose Manson's mania, but also be able to dig deep and find things in this person that I don't think an average interviewer could.
And I didn't tell you that.
Did you kill Shay?
Hell no.
Did you cut Hinman's ear off?
Hell yes.
And Snyder had a unique talent that I think could have done a lot more. He loved TV. He was doing radio, but then Letterman decided that he wanted to put him late night after the Late Show on CBS in the 90s. And Tom had already gone back to TV. He was working for CNBC, but I really think that Tom's talent lent themselves so well to the radio medium.
Yeah, it was the Tomorrow Show. Was that what?
That's right.
Yeah. One of your first radio shows was at when you were at Rutgers. Is that correct?
Yes.
What was the format of that show?
It's funny because the show that I did at Rutgers developed because of another show. What happened was when I was at WRSU, which is one of the two student stations at Rutgers University, they have, and they still to this day, and as we speak, my son is the sports director at WRSU and hosts a show called Nightline, which is a sports talk show, which they have after every Rutgers men's basketball game and every football game. Well, anyway, go back to fall of 1986. I'm hosting Nightline one night, and it was a snowy night in New Jersey. And the Rutgers men's basketball team had just lost by like 20 or 25 points. So we weren't getting any phone calls. December snowstorm in central New Jersey. In those days, college radio was live or it wasn't at all. There was no automation in college radio. So I found out that the DJ that was supposed to come and start playing music at midnight couldn't get there till at least 2 o'clock. And my broadcast partner that night, a guy by the name of Mike Emanuel, who now works for Fox News, he left. So there I am all by myself. And instead of just droning on about the game, I said, wait a minute. I said, let's do this. Nightline is over. Why are you up late on a Saturday night? Or what are you doing in the middle of a blizzard? All of a sudden, we get one call, then another, then another, and another. And it struck me, this is a lot of fun. And it kind of moved me away from sports. 2 days later, in my student mailbox, which that's the only way you could communicate back then, I got a note from the program director of the competing Rutgers student station. Rutgers is so big with 5 campuses in the New Brunswick, New Jersey area, they have 2 stations. He said, listen, we're going from common carrier, which was this tiny little AM deal just in the buildings over on one of the campuses, to an FM licensed station. Would you like to do the morning show? Would you like to be the sports director? And I thought, this is terrific. I'm only a sophomore. Let me think it over. Yes. And all of a sudden, I jumped to the other station. I'm doing a morning show and I'm doing all the sports I want. And my love for talk radio developed right there. So it was just this lucky happenstance. It was snowing. Let's talk about the blizzard. And a career in talk radio was born.
Well, you wrote about some of the people that you've come across, and one of them was Richard Bay. I was actually on his show once, and they sent a limo for us, and it was like the coolest thing for me. So, what was he like in person, I guess, and who were some of the other names that you've come across on your journey?
Rick Bay is someone that I worked with. It was one of the more interesting jobs I had. It was a situation called UBA TV. It was UBA, but it was created by a guy from Staten Island, and where they just would use the word Uber instead of saying it as Uber, as UBA. So they made UBA TV, whatever. So it's a streaming service before streaming really knew what it was all about. And what he tried to do was hire some personalities, and he ran a hedge fund, and he still does in New York City. And he built this great studio, and we were, street side studio by the stock exchange. And he hired a handful of hosts. He hired me, he hired Richard Bay, and he hired a gentleman by the name of Bob Grant, who was a big name in talk radio in New York City in the 70s and the 80s. Richard Bay is one of the nicest guys in the world. And to his credit, he created reality television. Reality daytime talk TV came from Richard Bay. And Jerry Springer essentially stole Richard Bay's act because Richard Bay started out doing a regular, typical, topical talk show for Channel 9 in New York City. And then it evolved into one of the craziest and one of the most fun talk shows that ever existed on TV. And when you know Richard, he's a really, really nice guy. He is ridiculously courteous. He is ridiculously intelligent. And he did the show right after me. I did the 11 a.m. show. He did the 12 o'clock show. And he's been a guest on my current show now. But he's just a very, very nice guy. And it was an interesting place because you had Bob Grant, the Sugar Hill Gang had a show. Jay-Z stopped by one night. And it was you would have to go to a website to watch this thing. But if this had come, this was 2009. If this thing had come around like maybe 2019, 2020, when we had Roku and other opportunities to stream and Twitch and stuff like that, I think it would have worked out. It lasted about 5 months and the guy gave up throwing any kind of money at it. But it was an interesting opportunity to host a daily web TV show in New York, bookmarked by some pretty interesting names and some pretty big names within the industry, especially in the New York area.
I have to say, Richard Bay was very nice to me as well when I met him. So,
Oh, he's a sweetheart. He really is.
so while you were learning the trade, I saw that you commuted from Jersey to Merrick, Long Island. I know Merrick well, I have family there, but it seems like craziness that you did that like all the time. So what was that whole experience like?
Well, I'll take one quick step back to explain why I had to do that in the first place. After college, for about a 15-year period, I walked away from the industry because I was told things. What do you think you're going to be in a movie one day? You go get yourself a job with a good company. They'll take care of you forever. And I listened. And I ended up working for some marketing company in Central Jersey, which went away in like 6 or 7 years. And there goes the job that was supposed to give me 50 years of security and a nice gold watch. So my wife sees an ad in the newspaper for something called the New York Voiceover Academy. And she said, you always wanted to do this. Why don't you try to do this now? So I reached out to a guy named Chuck McKibben. And Chuck, incredibly nice guy, ridiculously talented as well. For many years, he ran Mel Blanc's studio in Hollywood, and he's a great audio technician. So Chuck had become a teacher. And so he would do classes at the New York Voiceover Academy in the back room of a theater in Merrick, Long Island. And that's a schlep because I'm in Metuchen, New Jersey, and you're looking at about 75 miles over two bridges, all the way down the Belt Parkway. It was just the ride was horrible, but the experience was terrific because he taught me how to do voiceovers. He taught me how to properly use my voice, and he rekindled that love that I had from when I was a kid back in my bedroom with the walkie-talkie. And he showed me that I could do this for a living. And it started out with some voiceover commercials here and there. I did some public address announcing for sports teams in New York City. And then eventually the radio show came. But it all started with getting back into the business and having Chuck relight that fire within me.
I would ask about the sports teams. Now, I just have to say, no matter what time of day I go, I can go at 6 a.m., I can go at 3 a.m., 2 p.m. The Belt is always the worst. There's always
Yes.
traffic, no matter what. So let's talk about the sports team. So I'm very curious. I love that you announced for the Jersey Devils, you announced for the Yankees minor league affiliates. So how did that all come about to begin with?
Well, it's funny. I decided I wanted to try to get involved in some live event hosting. And so I'm thinking, you know what? I did some public address announcing back in high school for the basketball game basketball team a couple of times. So I sent out a couple of demos, and the first one that hit was this tiny little minor league basketball team in Brooklyn known as the Brooklyn Wonders, which became the Brooklyn Comets, and it was in the American Basketball Association. And this isn't the ABA of Julius Erving. This was some guy running a league out of a house in Indianapolis with a bunch of teams playing in high school gyms, but it was a way in. And then from that, I went and I auditioned and I became the public address announcer for the Staten Island Yankees, which was the Yankees single A affiliate in the New York Penn League. And they played in a wonderful little stadium on the waterfront in Staten Island that looked over at the Manhattan skyline. And I did that for about 5 or 6 years. And from that, I picked up extra PA jobs for an indoor soccer league team, the New Jersey Ironmen, which was owned by the New Jersey Devils. And for 3 years, I was the backup PA announcer for the New Jersey Devils of the National Hockey League. So I was able to do some sports, and that's a lot of fun. I mean, you do live event announcing like that. That's great. And you hear your voice come back and echo within a giant 20,000 seat arena. That was quite a kick. I enjoyed that a lot.
You had players on your show?
No, this is the guy that just sits there. It's the voice of God within the stadium and the arena. Now batting the third baseman, John Davidson, or whatever the name is. That's the name.
John Davidson was so versatile. He was.
He went on to host That's Incredible. Of course, he's versatile. And I don't know why I pulled that name out of nowhere, but it's the one I did. So
it sounds generic, but some of us remember.
John Davidson's been on the show, actually.
There you go. See, it all dovetails.
Well, in particular, the Devils. I'm just curious, since it's a major league team, like what kind of perks did you get for being involved with them?
Oh, I mean, great food. I mean, every night. I mean, I'm in there. And we would get the hobnob with the big time season ticket holders, and I mean, they're giving prime rib every night. So the penalty box in the announce booth was right after, like right outside this big exclusive club. So I would make sure that at the end of the first period, at the end of the second period, I would dip back in. I was in there for the prime rib and the soup, and then they would put out these wonderful brownies and chocolate chip cookies. And I always made sure I started the third period each night with a nice hot chocolate chip cookie. So it all worked out well. But it was nice because that was a top-notch organization to work for. And when you work for a major league level team like that, it was awesome. It was just a lot of fun. And it was also great to just sit right there up on the ice. You got guys, one penalty box is on one side, the other is on the other. One night I got a Devil and a Maple Leaf trying to beat the hell out of each other when they were both sent to the penalty box for fighting. So it was a lot of fun. That was a great time.
So around 10 years ago, you were selected to become the host of America Weekend.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an syndicated radio show. At the time, they only had around 19 cities listening to it. So first, how did that all come about? How were you selected?
Well, what happened was after I started working with Chuck McKibben, one of the radio jobs that I got was as a radio traffic reporter. And it was great because it was a SAG-AFTRA job. It's feeding my pension. It's putting food on the table and all that. But it became really boring because how many times can you say traffic is slow on the Belt Parkway? You could take a traffic report from 6 years ago, play it tomorrow at 2 p.m. No one will know the difference. So I started thinking back to when I did radio at Rutgers. And I even thought back to when I would sit in my room as a kid and play around with the walkie-talkie. And I said, there's got to be something else. And if not now, when? So what I did was I started to put together some demos, and to try to get myself out of that, bap 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 of the traffic report each day.
Mhm.
And I sent it around to a few different syndication companies, and there was one that was interested, and they had a current show, and it was called America Weekend. And at that time, and as you mentioned, Jonathan, they had three segments that could be taken by radio stations, and they were all hosted by people in the Midwest, and it was very colloquial. It sounded like Chicago, it sounded like St. Louis, and the guest lineup wasn't all that interesting or all that compelling. And I said to him, I think I could do better. So we talked about it, and then about a month later, I was driving home from Disney World with my wife and my son from vacation, and the phone rings, and they said, "Why don't you come in? We're interested in having you take over one of the segments of America Weekend." So I went in, and 2 weeks later, it debuted,
Wow.
and I was able to put together, and I still have a stable of wonderful publicists that are able to feed me interesting guests, actors, best-selling authors, lifestyle folks, influencers, and it's just an eclectic combination of a lot of different things. And conversation to me can be absolutely wonderful because it's the ultimate human connection. Like right now, with me, with you two guys, it's just us talking to one another and going back to the days of Tom Snyder and Larry King. It's what made the impression on me then. And I thought, I think I could do this and knock on Formica or wood or whatever I have here. It's
Mhm.
worked out so far.
And I was going to ask you about America Weekend. So, how much say did you have as far as the format and what the show's going to look like from the time you came in?
Well, I give them a lot of credit because they knew that what they were doing at that time really wasn't working. And
Right.
I said, I think I could make this better. I gave them a list of guests that I'd like to have on the show. I literally wrote down and gave them a framework of what the show could sound like.
Mhm.
And to their credit and to my benefit, they gave me total creative control. And I was very lucky because here I am going from traffic reports and doing voiceover and live stuff in New York City to 3 hours every weekend where I can control everything I put out there. And after 2 or 3 weeks, they said, you know what, you were right. It's working out. The idea of going after authors that had best selling books, talk about things that are important to people, eye level conversation. And it simply worked. And the feel good conversations with celebrities. And once the publicists saw that the conversations were good and that I treated their clients with respect, it created that pipeline that still exists to this day where I can get interesting people to talk with on the show.
Right. Good on the producers. Because I think if I were a producer, obviously I'm going to put my hands on the show, but you must make your on air personality comfortable. And if you
Yes,
bring in your ideas and some of your, and you help shape, you're only going to be more comfortable and in your groove.
exactly.
And if it wasn't working beforehand, they'd be unwise not to do that. So
And
yeah.
the worst thing would be if they had said to me, "Here, we want you to sound like this person," because you can't. I have
Mm,
to be me. It's like any kind of performing art. You're
right.
going to be what's inherently inside of you. Even when you're playing a character, you add a lot of yourself to that character. So when I'm hosting this show, I'm Ed Kalegi. I can't
Yeah.
be anybody else. So I had to be authentic. And to try to do it in a stilted or a fake way, and I couldn't do it. And to their benefit, yeah, they trusted me, and for them, the trust worked out.
Good.
You
Good
just mentioned
stuff.
something before, which I think is very appropriate. Actually, you just talked about like us, the three of us talking now. So to me, it's like you have to have a genuine interest in just hearing people's stories, and whether it's like the biggest celebrity or someone like an author with like to a niche market, it's
Yeah,
whatever it is, it's you're just genuinely curious about finding out their stories, and that shows up. So, you changed the format. So I'm just curious. You said 2 weeks. Is that how long it took so you started to notice a change in the ratings and everything?
it took about 3 or 4 months before the ratings started to pick up and they added some more stations. So it took 2 weeks for me to sit down with them and really come up with an idea. This is what I want to do. Why don't we have this type of an interview in hour one, this type of an interview in hour two? Here are some of the topics that I want to talk about. How about, if we can explore, can we get this celebrity? Can we get that celebrity? I
Mm,
wanted to be able to broaden the demographics. Let me go talk to someone who's contemporary right now in terms of the film industry. Let me go talk to someone who is a legendary name in Hollywood. Let me try to widen the tent and bring as many people into the show as possible, because the way it was a little too streamlined and it was a little too regional. So I was able to broaden things out because that's what broadcasting really is all about, and it worked out. So the ratings did go up, and they were beginning to add stations about 8 or 9 weeks into it. So they were really happy, and fortunately, it just built from there.
Wow. Yeah, the list of people that you've interviewed it's just ridiculous. Who was the first celebrity? Do you remember who
Dick
you ever
Cavett.
interviewed?
They said to me when I said I want to get celebrities on the show, so they said, okay, fine. So they assigned this intern, and she was, a college student. She's trying to make her way in the world. She's trying to impress this new talk show host that she's working with. And she said, Mr. Kalegi, if there's one person you would want to have on the show, who would it be? And I thought back to me watching that 5-inch television way back in the day. And I said, yeah, Dick Cavett. I'm thinking, yeah, she's going to get Dick Cavett. 2 days later, she reached out to the New York Times because he was writing a column for the Times at that point. And she said, Mr. Cavett would like to come on with you. He'll give you 10 minutes. And I'm thinking, wow. And it's like, really? And this is 3 weeks into the show. And so the arrangement was he was going to come on for 10 minutes. We started the interview. It lasted 45 minutes. And to me, it was one of the greatest experiences of my life, because here is the guy that made me want to do what I was doing. And now here I am with the show 3 weeks into it. And, I'm like the graffiti artist sitting at the toe of Michelangelo here. And it was great. And then at one point, he has that wonderful wit. And he said, do you have to go through your life saying Kalegi spelled the usual way? And it was like mic drop. That's it. The dream had come true. And it was absolutely wonderful. And the burst of energy that I got out of that, thinking, here we are 3 weeks into it, and I've already had the bucket list guests. And that interview helped me tremendously, because that's what the network then sent to publicists. Hey, this guy can talk to your clients and have as great of a conversation as he had with Dick Cavett. And it was the perfect thing because it helped out immensely. And that's when all the guests started to come on.
That is remarkable. That is to start there. I mean, where do you go from there? Obviously,
I
Julie
know.
Andrews and all these other people, but that's incredible. So this is my guess, is that you have 10 minutes is like him, like at the time hedging his bet, like, well, if I don't like this, at least I can get out of there in 10.
Right.
The fact it went 40 is the equivalent to Johnny Carson calling the stand up over to sit down, Yeah.
That is the perfect comparison. I mean, that's the wheelhouse right there. Because to me, that was a symbol of approval, that the guy is enjoying this. And I think because he knew I was prepared. I knew everything about him. And to this day, anybody that comes on, I owe it to them and to myself to know everything about the guests so that I can be as curious as I can within the conversation. I was talking to Cavett about when he was writing for Jack Paar, how he got the job with Jack Paar, his early days writing for Carson. We were all over the place. And I think he appreciated that I had a genuine interest in him. And that's the key to any good interview.
Yes.
You have to have an interest, and you guys have prepared for this today. You read the book. You make me feel good sitting here talking to you about this, and it's the essence of any good conversation. Preparation.
Well, let's talk about the book then quickly. It was great to say hello to. So, what prompted you to write it to begin with?
About 2.5 years ago, a woman named Diane Nine, who's a publicist down in Washington, D.C., she said to me, what do you do with all of these old interviews? Because she heard me talking about how I had just passed I think it was 1,200th guest on the show or something like that. I said, well, once it airs, it goes up online and it lives there forever. And she said, did you ever think about writing a book? And I said, no, not really. So she said, why don't you think about it? So I'm thinking we're just going to do transcriptions. Like Ed said this, guest said that. And it's like, like a script. And she said, no, don't do that. Go back and listen to them again and write about them. So I did. I pulled a couple of interviews. I pulled a Dick Van Dyke interview. I pulled the Carol Burnett interview, and I listened to them and I wrote about them. She said, I think we have the makings of a book. She shopped it around and she found Rand Smith Books, who was very interested, and they became the publisher. And now Diane Nine became my literary agent. And 2.5 years later, we got ourselves a book.
Jonathan and I talk all the time. We've enjoyed pretty much everyone who's come on this show. Honestly, like everyone has an interesting story. We've been very fortunate that way. But once in a while, there's someone that, because of who they are, because of how the interview went, or whatever, we're just in awe of them. Who's yours? Who stands out in your career thus far, besides Cavett, obviously?
Carol Burnett, because for me, Carol Burnett is a staple of television during the time when I was my most impressionable. Because when you think about the time she was on, 1967 to 1978, television changed dramatically during those 10 or 11 years. But the one constant was that show on CBS on Saturday nights. And she is, to me, one of the best entertainers who has ever lived. And that show was wonderful because the comedy from that show still resonates and lives to this day. I mean, you watch that skit between Tim Conway and Harvey Korman when they're in the dentist office. I mean, that is scream out loud funny. And what Carol had said to me, she was most proud of the fact that grandparents can sit with grandkids and they can both sit, enjoy, and laugh at the same time. And to me, when she was on that show, and I'm thinking to myself, sitting on the shag rug in front of the 25-inch Zenith Chromacolor back in the day, it's like, wow, I'm talking to Carol Burnett. And that was one of the few moments on this show where I literally could reach down and pinch myself. Is this really happening? And she was just an absolute joy to speak with.
Seemingly a best idea wins. She didn't have to be the star of every sketch. She didn't have to knock it out of the park herself. She had this cast, Vicki Lawrence and the others and Lyle Wagner and those guys. She just wanted to make people laugh. And the dentist sketch and so many other examples, as far as the grandparents, the grandkids, everyone could laugh. It was just universal. And I'm with you, man. Carol Burnett. Wow, that's a big one. Anyone else that?
Well, and one just to add on Burnett, one thing that really struck me about Carol was her business acumen as well, because how she got that show is incredible. She was on CBS and she was contracted to be on the Gary Moore show, and they wanted to renew her contract. So she started to think that she wanted to do something on her own. She had her manager put a clause in a contract that said, at any time, if Carol wants her own variety show, all she has to do is flip a switch. And so the bigwigs at CBS are like, yeah, all right, fine, just put it in there. She's never going to do that, whatever. They wanted to develop a show for her called Here's Agnes. It was a sitcom show after Gary Moore's show had ended. And she said, no. She walked up to a CBS executive at a Christmas party in 66 and said, I'm going to flip that switch. I want my variety show. They had no idea what she was talking about. They have to scour and go back up to the executive offices, pull out the contract and see that she did have this clause. They tried to talk her out of it. They told her that variety was a man's game, that it was Dean Martin, it was Milton Berle, it was Steve Allen. And she said, no, I don't want to be Agnes. I want to be Carol. I want the variety show. And they had to give it to her. And it made CBS look brilliant because of what that show became for them for the next 11 seasons. So I just found her business ability and her understanding of the business to be quite tremendous as well. And other fun interviews, I think about Henry Winkler. I mean, because for a kid growing up in the 70s, Fonzie, I mean, I had the lunchbox. I had everything. I had the Happy Days poster. I had the Happy Days book. And he is such a joyous man. And we ended up not talking as much about Fonzie and Happy Days, but something very close and near and dear to him, dyslexia. He didn't realize he was dyslexic until he was on Happy Days. And he went on to write a series of children's books. And we talked about that. And I'm thinking, I'm talking to the Fonz here. And again, to be able to talk to people that made such an impression upon you at a very impressionable age is a very cool thing.
Absolutely. And it's hard to remember that you're talking to the Fonz. I've had a few encounters with Mr. Winkler because he's so opposite of
I
this
know.
super edgy, cool guy. He's the sweetest, warmest human. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that
Right.
about Henry Winkler. And you're like, you have to, oh my gosh, that's the Fonz. And I'm with you. Like I
Yeah.
had the lunch pail and the this and the that and everything
Yeah.
was and all that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good one.
Yeah. And he's just so approachable. He's just a genuinely nice guy. And he seemed thrilled to be on the show. And that also made it a great thing for me. It's like the Fonz, Henry, is excited to be here. And that's just great. And I love the fact that he has had this resurgence and a whole new generation now knows him for something other than the Fonz. And I think that's great when you can reach out to so many different ends of that, demographic set and be able to touch, different generations. That's
Yeah.
very, very, I think
Yeah.
that's awesome.
And I'm curious now. Some of the interviews, were there things that, like, for us, it happens all the time. No matter how much research that you do, is there something that just really shocked you, like afterwards? Like I had no idea about that.
Well, it's funny in a way because I'm going to stay with this whole Happy Days thing for a second. I had Cindy Williams on, Laverne and Shirley, and she was perhaps one of the nicest people that I've ever spoken to. And she started talking about her family life. And she started telling me the story about when she was 6 years old. One of her clearest childhood memories is when her father would take her out and would park in front of a bar. He'd go inside for 2 hours, leave her locked inside the pickup truck. He'd go in there and tie one on, come back out and drive them both home. And she talked about how that stuck with her. And it really helped shape her at that young age. And I didn't think we were going there. I mean, when you end up in a place with a guest talking about something either that serious or something not as serious, but when you go unexpected places, that's terrific. And she really opened up. And when we finished the conversation, she and I talked for 20 minutes after we stopped recording. It was like my neighbor on the other side of the fence in the backyard. We just chatted for a while, and she was just so nice. And it was just and to be able to explore certain things and to be able to talk to stand-up comics, the guys like Robert Klein and Richard Lewis. Richard Lewis, to me, who is one of the most comfortable men in his own skin that I've ever spoken to, and to just hear about their process and their journeys. I love talking about journeys on the show with people. How did they get from point A to point B where everybody knows who they are? But just to be able to flesh out the stories behind these personalities, to me, is one of the best parts about what I do.
But as an interviewer, do you have anything you look back at and go, oh man, I would have done that differently?
In about 3 or 4 years into the show, they started putting a lot of YouTube influencers on the show because they thought it would be a way to attract an internet audience to radio. And sometimes these people have 15 minutes of fame because they really only deserve 15 minutes of fame. And we had one guy on, and I don't even remember what it is he was famous for, but he was so full of himself. And we had told him he was on broadcast radio. Every third word was a word that we couldn't air on the radio. And I'm thinking, why are we even doing this? And then that's when I had said to them, I said, just because somebody has a YouTube channel doesn't make them worthy of going on a show. And that's something that I wish that we would have stopped a lot earlier than we did. So we tried to do interviews that are a little bit more merit based after that. So fortunately, that was one part of the show about maybe 10 years ago that we've kind of stopped doing. So that was really the only regret in guests or the type of guests that we would put on.
That's understandable.
Yeah.
Well, what else? Yeah. So you have the book out, you have the show. So what are you working on next?
I think you will be seeing within the next few months an expansion of what we do. We are going to be expanding more into the digital world because podcasts are where the future lie, because our phones are now our radios. And on-demand audio is a very important part of American life in 2025 and beyond. And it will allow me to do deeper and longer interviews because a lot of times I'm limited to 11 minutes because that's how long an average show block is.
Oh.
So I had a conversation when I was in Los Angeles a few weeks ago for a book event. I spoke with actress Karen Richmond, and she was an absolute delight. And we spoke for an hour, and it made me realize that the digital platform will allow long form interviews in a way that I can't do on radio. So we are going to be expanding our digital footprint later this year as well. And I think it's going to open up an entirely different audience for the program too.
Find the book, first of all, it was great to say hello to. How can people find the show? And the book is available everywhere. First of all, let's get that straight. But how can people find the show?
The easiest way to find the show is to go to my website, which is Ed Kalegi, EDKALEGI.com. On there, we have links links to the cities in which we're on. We also have links to every single interview that has ever aired on the show. So it's become a great repository as well. So you can just search and dial it up, and you can listen to whoever you want to listen to. And as we have those expansion plans later this year, both in radio and on the digital platform, we'll be sure to put everything there. You can follow me on the socials at Ed Kalegi, and we'll update that stuff there as well. So 2025, we're 10 years into this, and we're looking to build on it even more.
At Ed Kalegi, which platform?
Right now, on the Weekend with Ed Kalegi on Facebook, at Ed Kalegi on Twitter /X/ whatever they're going to call it next week, and that's pretty much that. So yeah,
whatever they're going to call it next week. I was just thinking about when you were talking about the influencer that you had on and all that. Like,
yeah,
we didn't know where we were going to be 5-10 years ago, and here we are now. It's like I'm wondering 5-10 years from now, where are we going to be? Who knows? Like, what are we going to be? What's going to be our main source? Who knows?
I think we're stumbling upon that main source now, but I think it's great because you can put any type of a show together now, and you can zero into whatever type of content. You can create niche programming, and you can attract a very loyal audience that will love what you do.
Yep.
And it's taken broadcasting and it's made it narrowcasting, and I think that's a good thing.
I think so too. When you first came on, Eddie, you were talking about how you used to do like little pretend radio shows when you were a youngster. When I was an actor as a child, I used to do little plays in our backyard. Now everybody literally has their own network. I mean, it's a channel,
right.
It's a YouTube, but basically you can do whatever you want and get it out. Yeah, I think it's a great thing.
Moosie, it makes people more creative because you can do that, because it doesn't matter if one person sees it or if 10,000 people see it. You're able to do it, and it lights that fire, and it did for you as it did for me. And I think it's great. I mean, the more creativity that's out there, I think that's a very good thing.
Very good. Well, Ed, you're a good man and a huge talent, and we just thank you.
I appreciate that. That's very nice.
Also, the book is fantastic for anyone listening. I love all entertainment stuff anyway, so I eat it up. And obviously, since I'm doing something like that anyway, I love reading about all the backstories and all the interviews that you've done. It was fantastic. So I urge people to go buy it. It was great to say hello to. So
guys, it was great.
Yes, thank you. And anytime you want to come back, you're welcome on.
Absolutely. I look forward to it. We'll definitely do it again. Thanks so much. Have a good day.
You too. Well, again, this has been Pop Culture Retro. I'm Jonathan Rosen with Moosie Drier. And again, a very special thanks to Ed Kalegi. And please like, comment, and subscribe.
Thank you for tuning in to Pop Culture Retro, where no one was hurt during the making of this podcast. Listening to this podcast just makes you really cool.